Where do I start? Monsignor asked as he lied down on the lounging chair. It doesn't matter who you start with, but I would like to know how do you feel about all your kids, Miranda explained. And considering how many times he has, this was going to take a while, she uttered in her head. Well, being a father of 11 kids isn't easy, I can tell you that. My family has a lot of ups and downs, but at the end we still love each other to the bottom of our heart. Even so, it still baffles me on how something like this happened. I guess it was only a matter of time. Miss Lopez tilted her glasses down. Care to clarify? Well, all the kids have different personalities and can sometimes cause them to be at odds with each other. And let me tell you, sibling fights in the house is pretty common. We're not called the Loud House for nothing, the father chuckled. For example, I have two girls that are twins, right? They sleep in the same room, but they're practically in polar opposites. Lana likes mud and reptiles, not afraid to be covered in dirt, while Lola likes cleanness and her beauty. They also tend to fight the most. Common thing about identical twins, Miranda stated while writing some notes. What about the rest of your children? Well, there's Lori, my oldest daughter, and anytime myself and my wife were at work or leave for an event, she's entrusted to make sure that the house doesn't fall apart. Being that she likes to be organized, she seems to be handling it well. I would argue that she spends too much time on her phone. If she's one of those girls that likes to talk on their cellular devices almost most of the time, more like 24/7. It's funny enough, I do remember we first got her a phone when she was like 13, because she was old enough and responsible to handle one. She hardly ever used it for anything other than the occasional call, but everything changed the very next year. Go on. At the time, she started dating this boy named Roberto Santiago, and finally started using her phone more frequently. Might be a mixed blessing, because the phone bill went through the roof at that point. If you can't hear her, she can tell that she's away from nonstop texting as she always does. Lynn Sr. chuckled. This Roberto Santiago wouldn't happen to be the same one Clyde talks about, is it? The doctor questioned. Well, to be honest, I don't really know of a person named that. He's often called Bobby, though. Miranda nodded, confirming her suspicions. Okay, carry on. So pretty soon her phone became her world, basically. I think it got worse when I got her a smartphone after constantly asking for one, the father sighed. She's also the only child of the house to have a driver's license. I don't say it much, but I worry every day she'll end up in an accident due to her buried in the phone. Well, that's not an issue right now, though, the father stated solemnly. A parent's natural worry, Miranda silently agreed. And speaking of driving, here's my second oldest daughter, Lenny. She's not exactly the brightest tool in the shed. I love her dearly, but her condition can make you want to slap your forehead at times. The doctor paused. What kind of condition does she have? Only me and Rita know this, and possibly Lisa, but Lenny actually has ADHD. She's always sweeping likes to keep to herself. She's been prone to having plenty of DM moments, the Parental explained. Both of us were worried when she first started showing signs when she was only 4 and had a hard time staying in task some simple situations. But surprisingly, she's a high school junior now. You may think it's a miracle, but to be honest, myself and Rita would slip some medication into her drinks just to help her stay focused. And you've been doing it for 12 years? Lynn Sr. nodded. I don't like having to lie to the kids, but we're just not sure how to handle it. I will say now, Lenny's mind really seems to come down to its own when she's making smoothies or something related to fashion. He leaned up on the chair for a moment. She could turn any object into a fashionable piece of clothing, whatever it's a curtain, trash, anything. Well, there's one that sets mind to it. They all accomplished their goal, Miranda stated, jotting down Lenny's information. What's odd at that? On the other side of the family, my daughter Lisa has the smarts of a 40-year-old scientist, and she's only 4. Miranda's pencil snapped at the notion, and she gave a questionable look. Pardon? She spoke in a naive tongue, not believing him for a moment. She's 4 years old, yet she's heavily interested in chemistry, biology, math, anything that piques her interest, I suppose. She's even got a Nobel Prize in biochemistry when she was only 3, and now she's a teacher at the local college now. And I think you're going to ask, how can a 4-year-old be a teacher? Well, you see, when I speak with her, myself and Rita were very concerned because we hadn't seen anything like this since Lenny was born. And I may not be that smart, but I know babies wouldn't come out as smart as Einstein. We took her to a few doctors and did the best way we could to come up with that was maybe I with also that Lisa has some sort of autism or narcissistic neurosis. The Hispanic doctor took a moment to digest this information. No offense to you, Mr. Loud, but as ridiculous and impossible as it sounds, I'm willing to bet your daughter likely has some form of autism. It's uncommon for a mental disorder to produce a higher than average intelligent quotient. She'll be very interesting to speak with. She sharpened her pencil and took a heavy note of this. Getting away from the darker aspects, do you have any interests or hobbies? The father brightened up a bit. Well, I like dancing, a bit of karaoke on the side, and I'm really into rocking boulders. And speaking of which, have I ever tell you about my daughter Luna? She's a huge fan, especially Mick Swagger. He's essentially the reason why she likes rock and roll so much. We believe we both met him in disguise at a family fair once. I still cannot believe I actually saw Mick Swagger face to face. He fell back in the chair, stuck in the state of bliss. Miranda just stared at him uneasily, wondering when he'd snap back to reality. 30 minutes later, while the father was getting his therapy section, Rita walked back in the waiting room. The absence of the parage drew confusion from the girls. Where's Dad? Luann asked. He's busy doing a one-on-one session with Dr. Lopez. She'll do the same with me once he's finished. Same with you girls, the Mardarch explained. Lil raised her hand. Called it. Now, while we're talking with Miss Lopez, some things that we hadn't thought about before came up. So, I know it's a bit late in the game, but how did you girls handle your sister fight protocol last weekend? She asked with a stern look. Each of the sisters did not want to be reminded of that failed system. It served as nothing but embarrassment of how everyone acted so childish and efforts that were on combined flawed thinking too. But the main reason no one could ever utter because it forced them to bring in the most painful memories of everything that happened to that point, and everyone wanted to try and move on from this low point on their lives. It started with me and Lenny fighting over a dress, Lori began. I didn't want her to wear the same thing I did, so I demanded she takes it back to the mall. The 17-year-old started to cover her face in embarrassment. I refused, and we got into an argument of who should wear the dress, Lenny finished. Rita couldn't help but pinch the bridge of her nose at this. At first she thought that it might have gotten started due to a legitimately serious argument, not over something petty like a dress. What else happened? She edged on. Call it a mother tuition, but she had a feeling that she'd be utterly pissed by the time her tale was done. So the protocol was put into action. Lori was cooling off in the kitchen, with Lenny upstairs in her room. Lincoln, he wanted to get a snack out of the kitchen, but I wouldn't let him because, well, Lori needed her space, Luna added. I found a bagel under the sofa and he could try. Apparently all it did was give him the urge to commit emesis of verticulosis, Lisa put her input, and by that I mean vomit, she added with clarification. However, he didn't use the bathroom because Lenny was cooling off, but I gave him a bucket to use, Lana stated sheepishly. Then Lincoln wanted to watch Monster Truck Rally, but we wouldn't let him for Lori and Lenny's sake, Lucy spoke. And how exactly did you do that? Rita asked. Her annoyance in her voice made it very clear. Len, Lola, and the Goff had guilty looks on their faces. We beat him up when he reached for the remote, the Jacques explained. The next 10 minutes were spent with each sister telling their role within the sister fight protocol. After Doe explained what happened on Friday and Saturday, the sisters realized the unfair treatment they had put their brother through. Kicking him out of his room not only once, not twice, but 3 times in total. Taking his bed sheets without permission to use as a divider for one of the girls' rooms. Not even explain how the protocol for to him and admittedly telling him to keep out of it. It did not help with their situation one bit. Stating that it was a sister thing, it was pitiful excuse to the mother, but Rita finally knew what part Lincoln had played in all of this. Keep it out of it and go along with whatever his sisters did, no matter how innocent it was. She had to yet give her daughters a ton lashing since this whole situation had started, and she was too angry to even speak with them. But now... So let me get this straight. You girls thought it was okay to use your brother's room to avoid each other without his consent? You took his bed sheets even with when we had spares in the basement. And on top of that, the only time he asked about the protocol, when you just told him it's a sister thing and to butt out? Rita asked. She squinted her eyes in anger. Her tone of her voice seemed to carry venom at this point. The girls nodded. So, are you mad at us? Lenny asked. No, Lenny. The girls calmed down a little. Because mad doesn't begin to cover it, Rita yelled, causing the girls to flinch, even grabbing the attention of Gigi. How could you girls act like this? We raised you better than that, and you have known better than to treat your own brother like his opinion doesn't matter. Not only you treat like his possessions and section of the house, you can do that in your own homes, but not in my house, missus. The girls had sank into their chairs in sadness. I understand Lincoln accidentally ignited the intentional argument, but the intentions were pure, and to be honest, you girls literally are at fault for keeping secrets from each other. All he wanted to do was get everything back on track, Rita scolded. Lori and Lenny, I'm especially disappointed in both of you for arguing something so trivial. Both of you brought the dress, so what is wrong with having the same item? You both share a room, for God's sake. The two lowered their heads in guilt. It was so embarrassing on how their mom would use words like, and literally. The apple really didn't fall far from these two. I'm so disappointed in you as well, Luna and Luann. You shouldn't have let yourself get dragged into the argument, especially when it didn't concern you. It was over a petty reason. This is worse than the time you kids fought over money. Rita had sat down in one of the adjusting chairs. Aside from Lily, I'm disappointed in the rest of you for going along with everything that happened, but her anger softened as she mellowed out. I'm mostly disappointed in myself. Deserted confusion from her sisters. I know I have a right to be upset, but the blame goes on me and your father for not taking the time to settle things between our kids like a real parent would. It's our fault for you girls to end up like this. Rita felt hot tears streaming down her face as she started to sob. Each of the sisters could feel their mother's pain, but none felt it more than Lori. Being the oldest, she had to care for her siblings anytime both parents stepped out of the house. So before she knew firsthand, it was hard caring for 10 kids. She didn't even like to be bossy and overbearing sister, but she knew it would keep the others from going overboard. Recalling the time her siblings usurped their control from her, the house would have been completely demolished by their antics. Thankfully, it was Lincoln who came to his senses at first and helped make sure everyone avoided the epic grounding. And now her brother was afraid of her. After all the treatment she gave him, she literally felt like a total bitch. However, one grating thought was that stuck in her head. Why did her parents avoid setting in their matters? Was it because... No, she didn't want to think about that. Lori just sat next to her crying mother and hugged her tight. Mom, don't blame yourself for what we did. We take responsibility for our actions, and you had nothing to do with that. I just wish we could have been better daughters. Lori, you and the girls are the best things ever happened to me. I was even ecstatic when Lincoln was born, but... Mom, you do try your best, and we get it. I understand it may be because you always want to watch over everyone while you and Dad are away. I know we lost your trust because of you know what, but I need to ask this. Are you and Dad afraid of us? The teen asked in worry. Okay, so now all 11 of your children, and I am so sorry to bring the recent memories as to what happened with your son, but that is why we are here. Now, given what you said, how you feel closer to some of your kids in comparison to the others, Miranda asked. Well, it's given that I'm close to Luann and Luna having similar tastes. I always wanted to help teach Lana about fixing things around the house. Even at times she does break them, just so I could teach her. A good amount of his Saturdays were spent fixing stuff around the house when he could have been relaxing after a hard week at work. On occasion, I do play music with Luna. I'm practically decent with the saxophone, and he even got the cowbell player for the band. Until they kicked me out, the father chuckled nervously. Luann takes after my sense of humor. Also, Lynn Jr. shares my love for sports, although I do wish Lincoln did as well. Speaking of your son, what about him? Being the only boy in the family, I'm sure he's probably a close father-son relationship going on. Well, of course I've taught Lincoln how to ride a bike when he was 3 years old. I've taken him on a couple fishing trips. He's actually pretty good on the cello, too. At some point, I even plan on giving him the family car when he's old enough. Sounds promising, Miranda stated as she kept writing. Anything else? Well, there's... Len Sr. dug into his mind to try and find more fond memories of him and his son. He found more moments, such as keeping a volcano project when he finally was there at the time to help him. After that, he was drawing a blank, as all he can remember the times Lincoln got himself into trouble or had lied of getting out of doing something, such as the case when Rita signed him up for football, at least some type of exercise, not to mention the times Lincoln clogged the toilet. Admittedly, the father was still a little peeved at something karaoke CDs flushed down the can. Miranda studied the look on Lynn's face. Mr. Loud, do you feel as if you were close to your son as you would have liked? Huh? That's ridiculous. I know my son likes the back of my hand. Can you name some of his hobbies? Well, he likes to play video games, reading comics, Dairyland, and, The psychiatrist shook her head. Some parents always go with denial, she thought. Do you sometimes wish he was more like his sisters? Lynn Sr. sighed. Yes, my girls seem to have found out that they were very passionate about, even the girls younger than Lincoln, and even get some achievements from it. I'm not sure if Lincoln has found a certain calling yet. Well, Lynn, are you aware of the phrase, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink? The father nodded. Lincoln will come to his own eventually. He just needs time and acceptance, so he could grow up to be a decent artist, or writer of some sort. Or we may never know. But you can't force someone to doing things that they don't like, because if their mind isn't into it, it will lead them to failure. Once he finds a passion, he'll stick with that. And I could tell you, I wish to be closer to your kids. So that's why I recommend trying to find the time for them, so you can get to know them better. Granted, I know it must be difficult, given the size of your family. Well, myself and Rita always make plans on how we can help the kids. However, sometimes they could be a bit selfish. There was this one instance where Lincoln had wanted to go over to McBride's house to help with his volcano project. I was at the disheartened because I couldn't find the time to help him. Whenever I could, one of my daughters wanted me to help them with something. Same for my wife. Eventually, they went over to McBride's house and essentially broke them. Even then, my daughters wanted our help, and when we were busy helping Lincoln with his project, at the moment, we put our foot down and told him to wait, the father explained. Did they listen? Yeah, I think we used too much pressure on the volcano, though, Lynn Sr. laughed. Noted, but remember, don't be afraid to say no. They may not like the answer, but it can give them a closer to your children. Now, may I speak with Rita? The father nodded before getting up and leaving the room. Upon coming into the waiting room, he found Rita crying along with Lori comforting her. Okay, I clearly missed something. Are you alright, sweetie? Rita simply shook her head. Well, right, Miss Lopez wishes to speak with you. Thanks, the mother said before sulking down the hall. Once the march was out of earshot, the father turned to his daughters. Alright, what happened while I was in there? Miranda was rather surprised to see the Loud mother walk into the room, looking completely depressed. Are you okay, Mrs. Loud? Rita simply shook her head, only giving a sniffle in response. She sat in a lounging chair. The doctor tossed her a box of tissues, to which the mother started using immediately. The psychiatrist gave her the same speech that she did give Lynn, regarding the information spoken within the room, and with that the mother was free to use it as she pleased. If she wanted to keep it private, Miranda won't say a word to anyone. So what happened while I was speaking with your husband? It turns out that Lincoln did have a role in their system. The girls thought it was perfectly okay to take up his space, use his belongings like they were expandable, and any time he asked about their protocol, they just told him to keep out of it. The mother felt her anger returning. And that's not the worst of it, though. Their whole protocol, all this started over a fucking dress. Miranda was a bit surprised, but then again, the two teenage girls, they weren't talking about it. She's been plenty in there in this youth, although normally it was over shoes instead of piece of clothing. The doctor herself was guilty at one point, but she eventually saw the futility of fighting over an item of fabric it would only bring temporary happiness before the next big thing to hit the store came in. And the girls would repeat the process over and over, being slaves to the company's marketing. So, what did you do? I let my daughters know what I just thought about the whole situation. But I can't help but blame myself for this. Rita paused. I could tell you as a mother to another that raising a boatload of children is possibly the hardest challenge of my life. I love each and every one of them dearly, but with the tensions running in a family with several diverse personalities, myself and Lynn avoid picking favorites, lest the rest of our kids come down to one of them. It's even worse knowing what's exactly happened to my little boy. Rita wiped tears from her face with tissues. Miranda said nothing, as the mother of 11 continued to cry. She kept a stolid face, but she pitied Rita. She knew it was stressful raising a child, but she would never think of having a large amount of louds, but still, if something happened to her bundle of joy, she'd be in the same person as the monarch. That's why whenever kids argue, both parties are punished, but its strategy doesn't work. My eldest daughter just asked if I was afraid of them. The doctor secretly hoped that she wouldn't have to deal with another case of Syngenesophobia. Are you? No! Rita instantly yelled. So sorry, but no. I want them to be assured that I do not fear my own children. It's really bad enough that Lincoln fears his own sisters. They're just hard to control at times. When all my kids become angry, they're like a bull in a china shop, or a mini tornado of some kind. In those situations, I hate saying it, but sometimes it's best to duck and wait for the opportunity to set them straight. Does that make you feel more distant from your children? The doctor asked. Rita nodded. My only job is a dental assistant, and before that I was a crossing guard. It's hard enough to make ends meet. Don't tell anyone this, but sometimes it does cross my mind what it would be like if our family was smaller, but at the end, I just realized it wouldn't be the same, and that's all my selfish thinking of that part. I can understand that, but in realization to the question, do you feel like a close connection with some of your kids over the others? Rita had to take a moment to think. Lying on the chair, she having so many daughters, it almost felt like monotosis, given that she went through the same emotions when it came to raising them. She helped Lori, Lenny, Luna, and Luann when they started having their first time of the month. Lynn was due to start having it any day now. She even helped her three oldest daughters deal with their hormones when puberty started setting in. Sure enough, Rita knew that she had to do the same with Lucy, twins, Lisa, and even Lily some 15 years later. However, it was with Lincoln, being the only boy in the family, he'd be taught differently. Compared to his sisters, he had to learn to grow to be a man someday. Rita wouldn't say this in front of her daughters, but raising a boy was possibly the best thing to ever happen, as it finally changed her system. It was entirely a different experience, and she was glad she was lucky enough to be bringing a son. As far as my daughters and I are concerned, I would say I'm the closest to Lori and Lenny. Those two will be legally classified as adults in the next few years, and I, as a mother, needed to do all I can to prepare them for that crossing. That's why I was disappointed in them when they argue over a dress. They've been living in the same room for 8 years, and they should all know better than to argue over petty things. There's Lily, of course. Since she's a baby, I can't say that I'm close to that much of either of my daughters. 3 of them are tomboyish, and they look in their father for advice. Although they'll ask me for money, womanly help with dealing with certain aspects. I could definitely see Lola doing that when she's in her teens. Miranda then jotted down some notes. But I do hold my son close to my heart. Me and Lynn want to see him become a fine gentleman one day. I guess you could say that something popping out of him feels like a breather after having so many daughters. The mother chuckled a little. Even the doctor couldn't help but smile at the joke. I know sometimes he feels lonely, but that he doesn't have a brother. Personally, I did hope to give birth to another son or two, but things didn't happen that way, so I try to be there for him as much as I can so he doesn't feel alone. On one such occasion, it was to take on your daughter to work day, and of course Lincoln being male, he couldn't come with the girls to their dad's job. Didn't stop him from trying though. Rita fondly remembered when the boy disguised himself as a girl. Would have worked, but his parents know how to count heads. So I took him to my job. He was a little bored, of course, but managed to keep his imagination run wild. Unfortunately, we ended up ruining the novel that I've been working on. The Hispanic woman tilted her glasses. You're a novelist? Well, not exactly. The original copy about my boring job as a dental assistant right after working on that novel for years. I couldn't help but be upset. But after Lincoln told me the lengths that went through to get back after he lost it, it gave me a new idea. It was going to be about a fearless thrill seeker based on my own child when we rode up home on our skates while clinging on to the back of the horse, the mother chuckled. Miranda found it funny and heartwarming. Seems like she's very closer to her son than the father, she thought. Though I did grow concerned about Lincoln's lifestyle. Unlike his sisters, he's not as active. I tried to get him out to do exercise. Unfortunately, he was being too lazy about it, so I signed him up for Pee-wee football. He managed to dupe Lynn Jr. into playing for him, although she didn't mind. However, I didn't appreciate being lied to. When he manned up and finally played, despite scoring at the wrong team, I would have punished him. But at that thought of getting jump scared by his own team, it was bad enough. Despite all that, I would have always liked to be there for him. And one time when I wasn't, he ended up like how he is now. Rita felt more tears coming, so she quickly grabbed another tissue. I see, the doctor paused, reviewing some of the notes. Is it alright if I ask Lynn Sr. to come in? The mother nodded in response. Miranda walked out of the office and came back with the father 2 minutes later. He seemed to be rather mellow like his wife. The girls expanded that they have told their mother and asked the same question. The father reassured her that he wasn't afraid of his own children, though some of her actions may have proved otherwise. Rita sat up to make room for her husband as a Hispanic doctor sat in the opposite chair. Now, both of you had shown me that you were indeed afraid of being too distant from your children. You say you don't pick sides, but this may become because of sibling rivalry. Yet you are so close to them, while not keen of interacting with the others very much. I understand you two are afraid and you are both bad parents, but let me tell you this. Any bad parent would have just let things continue the way they were without seeking help. You both did the right thing by bringing this up so you could settle your problems, not only for your son's sake, but for your entire family. Now, I understand that this is going to be difficult controlling so many kids, but you can't be afraid to put your foot down to prevent something worse from happening. It's better to put an end to a conflict than to let it drag on. I'm sure you two are already taking some measures to make sure nothing like this happens again, no? Both parents nodded. Now, to absolve your worry about being close to all your kids, I could say this. Spend as much time as you can with those you feel you aren't close to. Get to know them better. Make them feel comfortable around you. Don't try and overdo it, as this may push the child away. It doesn't have to be anything outlandish. A nice talk or doing their favorite activities will do, but over time, I'm sure your kids won't even think about being afraid of them. Lynn Sr. gave a sigh. Thank you for your time, Dr. Lopez. It's nothing. The doctor looked over at her clock. It was already 4 p.m. Now, given the kind of time constraints, I may be able to only talk with one or two of your daughters. Which one do you want? Miranda looked over her notes. Send in Lori.